The voices told me that, the only way I was going to make it, they couldn't see me if I was naked, and so I'm running down the interstate naked, and I made it almost to the bridge. I don't know how far, but there's a cop sitting up there. He's got his lights on, and he's standing at the front of his car. But I didn't even look at him because I was invincible, right? And he was so shocked, like he could have just reached out and grabbed me, but I'm just running right by him.
He can't see you.
Yeah, he can't see me, And so I probably got about 5 feet past him before he finally came and grabbed me. Yeah, so the trick was I forgot to take my bandana off. So so
sure.
he could still see me.
Let's be honest about recovery.
The rewards, the challenges.
Let's talk about our failures.
We are flawed people, after all.
Let's challenge the stigmas that weigh us down.
Because while most of us are looked at,
few of us are seen.
Let's talk about addiction.
And how Christ overcomes our weaknesses.
Because we are loved.
Because we are loved.
Because we are loved.
We are loved.
We are
because
loved.
we are loved.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Jesus Loves Addicts and another great story of lost and found. And today we have a guest, Ryan Lantaff. Correct me if I'm butchering that, Ryan. But I'm really looking forward to getting into Ryan's story. One of the interesting things is so many people who come out of this lifestyle and are filled with the joy of what the Lord has done to them, feel kind of this calling to give back. And this is one of those gentlemen. And so he runs a program called Agape Life Gardens. It is kind of a transitional house, but he was just educating me. They like to call it a discipleship home, which I love. And so he runs that. He's also assistant pastor at a church called Love Me Anyways, which I would love to hear where that name came from. So actually, why don't we start right there? Where did that name come from for that church? Were you part of naming that church, or did you just sort of inherit that?
No, so the church name actually came from my pastor, Pastor Lloyd Michael Austin, and I met him in treatment. So he would come and teach at the Wings of Life, and that's his story. I'd love for him to come on this podcast because he has an amazing testimony, but he was looking at life in prison, and God gave him that ministry in prison, and he began to walk it out in prison. And miraculously, he went to court one day after 8 years waiting for court, and the judge let him go home with his wife. And that's a story I'll let him tell. But it's Love Me Anyway Ministries. For those that are unlovable, we're going to love them anyways.
Yeah, well, that's what I love about that title, right? I mean, just it rings of love me in spite of myself, right? Yeah, so that's really neat. So,
and we need that.
Don't we all? Yeah. So that's awesome, Ryan. So you talked about in your introduction, you were caught in this trap of addiction from about age 11 to 30, to 36, if I got that right.
Yep, correct. And I got arrested my first time at 11 years old, and that kind of started my journey and criminality and just a life of lawlessness. You started with a bang.
How in the world did you get started at 11?
Yeah, well, it's not as interesting of a story as you think it would be, but we were out shooting out street lights and being kids, but that kind of kick-started that whole process with the police department where I lived, but by the time I was 14, I was a full-blown addict, expelled from school, went to my first treatment program, and that kind of kick-started all 14. Of that. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Tell us more. What kind of home life did you have? Where are you from?
Yep. So great mother, great father too, but I'll get into a little bit about that as well. My dad was born in South Dakota. Mom was born in Georgia, and had one of those love stories. When they met, they were both in mental health and worked nationally with mental health back in the 70s, and they met in Atlanta, and my dad looked at my mom after a meeting. They hadn't talked, and he looked at her and said he was going to marry her one day, and kissed her. And
love at first sight.
Yes, until it wasn't. But at that time, it was love at first sight, and So we lived in South Dakota briefly. That's where I was born, was in South Dakota. We moved to California, and then by the time I was 4, we moved to Spanish Fort, Alabama.
Okay.
And so I have been there since kindergarten in the Daphne, Spanish Fort area. Yep.
So that's definitely home.
Yep, it is. It is.
So you said it was love at first sight until it wasn't. Was there, did disaster strike at some point? Or
yeah, so my dad was diagnosed bipolar and, just had a lot of issues from his past and from when he grew up, and very abusive situations with his family and his older brother, and physically and mentally as well. And so none of the physical abuse as far as touching and those kinds of things ever happened, except for physical violence. And so I think my earliest memory as a child, we were in California, and I remember me and my brother were playing in some sand dunes next to the house where we're at, and had some new clothes on, and we got into some white paint and got it on our pants. And I can remember the sunset walking back to the house and how beautiful it was. It's almost a picture seared into my mind, but I remember getting home, and my dad was so angry that flew off the handle. He beat us pretty badly with some PVC pipe, and that was my first memory as far back as I can go was that memory. And so my dad
So he was fathering like he was fathered?
Correct. In some ways not. It was really bipolar really fit him because he always provided for us and was always there in that context and was loving in a lot of different ways. He was probably one of the funniest men I've ever met. Everybody loved him. For instance, his 50th birthday party in Daphne, the mayor was there and the city council, and they gave him the key to the sewer of Daphne, and so he was a jokester, and everybody loved him, and he just had a streak in him that when he would melt down.
Can I ask you a question about that, Ryan? Because that's interesting, right? So this kind of dual personality, not clinically, but what you get to see. And so it's often really hard on the family who sees the dark side of those people when they are especially loved by the community around them who don't see the dark side of those people. It can almost add to the resentment. Did that ever was that ever difficult for you? Like, I don't even fully know how to put this, but to kind of see this man being adored by the community around him while he was really a source of intimidation, if not fear, for you growing up, is that?
Yeah, I hated him.
Yeah.
So until later on in life that I was able to find some forgiveness, and we can get into that in a little bit. Yeah. But I call it my pre-17 years and after, because my first 17 years of life were completely dark, and if I had to be honest with myself, when I look back, I don't ever remember feeling love in the sense of internally, I know my parents loved me, and we did things, we did family vacations, in a lot of ways it was a normal family, but in many, many ways it was not.
You mentioned a brother. How many of y'all are? Is it just you and your brother?
Two brothers. And so I have a half brother. My mom had a previous marriage, and then my next brother's about a year and a half older than me, and he's my full brother. But they're both my full brothers. We don't look at it that way. So it was very, very dark. My dad, most of his language was,
not G-rated.
Worthless.
Wasn't salt.
No, it wasn't at all. And I got told my whole life that I was worthless and stupid and would never amount to anything. And these explosions, and it's something that I adopted at a very early age.
You believed it.
Yeah, I believed it. Life and death is in the power of the tongue, and we'll eat the fruit thereof. And so as he spoke those things to me, I re-spoke them over my life. It's what resonated with me and what I knew. And so I grew up with that, and both my brothers were straight A students, and SGA and track, and I struggled, with school. So
Now, did he speak differently to them? Were you kind of treated differently, or?
I caught the brunt of it, and so both my parents grew up on farms, and both of them decided to get an education, and they didn't want their kids to have to grow up with that, and so they very much pushed education and those types of things. And for both my brothers, they did real well with it, but I would have been much better being a farmer.
Yeah.
So I think it just, some of my personality traits were similar to his, and I think internally, he had some disdain, not necessarily for me, but
what of him he saw in you.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
All right. So were you when we'll get to you're 11, you got some friends, y'all are shooting out street lights.
Yeah.
Were y'all drinking, experimenting with drugs at 11 or just rambunctious?
Rambunctious,
okay.
Yeah. And so I didn't really start drinking until I was 13. My dad had given me tried some beer at an early age. And, he used to joke when I was teething, he would put whiskey in our mouth to rub our gums and all of that. And, it was almost prophetic. Yeah. In that instance. But I started drinking at 13.
With him?
No, not with him. No, they never drank with me or anything of that nature. Yeah, there wasn't a user-friendly relationship. And both of them were highly intelligent. Both of them have 2 master's degrees. My dad has 3 bachelor's degrees. He was a self-taught photographer and got best photographer of the year out of Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee 3 years in a row, and learned it all out of books. He was one of those kind of guys that was just extremely
probably
intelligent.
Put as much pressure on himself as he did on those around him. I mean,
absolutely. And so, but by the time I became old enough to know better, I spent a lot of time in physical abuse.
When did that stop? Was this still going on at 11, 12, 13?
Yes, and until I turned 14, when, it was really like a ticking time bomb. I was a very quiet, reserved kid. I was very much to myself. I had a couple of really good friends, but because of that verbal abuse, I just stayed to myself. And but when alcohol entered the scene, I can remember the first time I drank. It was at spring break, and all of a sudden I could talk to everybody, and I was flirting with girls, and doing things I had never done before in my life, and I loved it, and it was the first thing in my life that I remember that I loved, Before that, it just, life just felt empty, and I always, from a young age, had questions. I always believed in God. I always believed there was a creator.
Were your parents Christian or professing that way anyway? Or?
Catholics. They grew up Catholics, but I don't believe either one of them ever read the Bible or truly knew about salvation and what that means. Yep. But my mom, her heart is about as close to a Christian as you can be. She's one of my best friends and has been for a very long time. And so, I would like for her relationship with Jesus to be more and have a better understanding through the Word of who He is. But she exemplifies Him in many, 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 many ways. So, but my dad, not so much. He was very heavy into pornography. It's we could. I know we're kind of going on rabbit trails
that's
here,
right.
but So
he had an addictive personality. I mean, that's
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000%. And it was kind of the magazines under the rug, swept under the rug kind of deal. But his closet would be stacked full of them, and. We would have us back in the VHS days where you could record about 3 movies on a VHS tape, but he would record stuff in the middle of them, and we could be in the middle of watching a children's film, and all of a sudden a clip would pop in,
Wow,
and so
which is really hard for a male, right? Because once those images are there, they don't leave quickly.
Yeah, they sear in your brain.
That's right.
And so, and I was very much, I knew it was wrong as a kid, and it really, because it was something that my dad seemed to love, I hated it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the MO with early childhood. If
he was for it, you were against it.
Yeah, and that came to education as well. And so by the time I turned 14 and alcohol and drugs really settled into my 9th grade year, to give you an example, I went into band and did very well. And so I was in the marching band in high school. And we had our game, before the first week of school, the homecoming game or whatever that one is. And so I got really drunk before going to the marching band's exhibition. And obviously they could tell in my marching techniques that I wasn't walking really straight. And so before I even started high school, I got suspended for a week, my first week of high school, for drinking. And so that started my high school career and would be the theme of my life for a good while.
Now, was pornography your father's main addiction, or was he also in alcohol and some other types?
No, I know through sharing stories, there were some times throughout high school at different programs and things that I went to that he tried to connect with me in that way and shared some stories of, him in the military and some of his usage. He didn't tell me a whole lot about it, but, I think he really tried to connect with me in that way, saying that he understood in his own way. And so I know he had in his past, but, my parents drank socially. They would throw parties and Christmas parties and dinner parties and those kinds of things. So alcohol was always prevalent
just there
in the house. Yeah.
Okay. Mom pretty much, though, drank socially, but more the straight-laced.
Correct.
Kind of, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to take a moment to recognize a major podcast sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by America's Thrift Stores, your go-to option for decluttering and giving back. If you have a closet bursting at the seams or a garage that's seen better days, we've got the perfect solution for you.
That's right. America's Thrift Stores makes it easy to clear out the clutter and make a positive impact in your community. Whether you're cleaning out your wardrobe, downsizing your living space, or just looking to give back, America's Thrift Stores has you covered.
And here's the best part. You've got options. Schedule a hassle-free home pickup, drop off your items at one of their convenient donation sites, or swing by an America's Thrift Store to donate in person. No matter which way you choose, you're making a difference.
Absolutely. Every donation you make to America's Thrift Stores directly benefits charities in your area, such as the Home of Grace and other fantastic organizations dedicated to helping those in need.
For example, donations made to America's Thrift Stores in southern Mississippi help the Home of Grace provide support and assistance to individuals facing drug and alcohol addiction. Your contributions make a real impact on their mission to provide freedom from addiction through Christ-centered recovery. So not only are you decluttering your life, but you're also helping build a stronger and more supportive community.
It's truly a double blessing. So what are you waiting for? Clean out that closet, clear out that garage, and make a positive difference in your community by donating to America's Thrift Stores.
Visit America's Thrift Stores online to schedule a home pickup, locate a donation site near you, or get directions to one of their store locations.
America's Thrift Stores, where giving back never goes out of style.
You said something, Ryan, I wonder if you could speak to. I don't think we really highlight it much, but that the tragedy of addiction is often looked at when we get to the years of imprisonment or, losing our licenses, our jobs, our families, whatever. But, it's interesting. I really think the tragedy of it is, you've already mentioned it, right? It's when you first use it and it works for you, right? You fought that love affair is really the tragedy of it, because it is the con. It's the setup. And so you said, when I first drank, suddenly I could talk, I could flirt with girls. I felt, really good.
And that was the first time you ever loved anything.
Yeah, that's powerful, right?
Yeah, and it's a sad state of affairs, and a lot of that's, I've dealt with my own mental health issues, and I was diagnosed bipolar at a very young age, and AD this and blase,
all the letters.
Yeah, all the letters. I had all the letters, and we live in a sinful world in a fallen state, and I'm sure some of that was very true at that time, and I think a lot of it was exacerbated by drug use and alcohol. So there's really no telling how much of it. Of course, I was a little psychotic. I would take hallucinogens 3 to 5 times a week for years, and so there's things that I was doing that I know caused a lot of mental trauma and issues.
Well, I would also think that with the relationship or lack thereof with you and your dad, that even being given a diagnosis of bipolar, knowing that from what you've been taught that your dad is bipolar and you didn't want to be anything like him.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
so there's your self-hatred. I would have been.
Yeah, it enraged me, and so by 11 started going to therapists. I think I probably had 9 or 10 different therapists throughout, the high school life. And
well, so that's interesting. Who instigated you going to therapy? Because it doesn't sound like your dad would. I mean, am I incorrect there?
Both my parents, so my mom probably instigated most of that. I think my dad probably would have left me in jail long before my mom, but she's God bless her. I love her, but she was my biggest enabler in my life, and so by the time I hit 14 and all these things, and I really began to think for myself and think outside of the box due to drugs and alcohol, and I realized there was a different life out there other than what I'd been living in my home life. I'd made a decision at that point that I was going to be good at something, and what I was going to be good at was doing wrong,
drinking and doing drugs.
I was going to be the best at it that I could possibly be, and and if they, my dad and other people wanted to say I would be unsuccessful and no good and
that's what you were
unintelligent, then that's exactly what I was going to show
them.
I was going to live it out, and I did exactly that. And so I think by the time my first 9th grade year, I went to 9th grade 3 times, and I think I had 1.5 credits in high school. By the time it was all said and done, I spent over 2 years of high school locked up and various programs and treatments and
these
boot
were
camps
like youth. That's what I was going to ask. Were these like the boot camps?
And
not what we see today with treatment.
Correct. And so they tried to put me in everything that they could. It's a really interesting story. I just built a hunting cabin with one of my companies up in Selma, in that area, which is around Marion. And so that was one of the first places I went was Marion Military School that they sent me to, and I hadn't been there in 30 years, but it brought back a lot of memories being up there because this time of my life was so dark. I was cutting on myself. I was self-mutilating, drinking drugs. Hallucinogens every week. It was just...
you were in torment.
Yeah, I was in torment and trying to find a way out and hopefully find something that I could latch on to, and so I just call them my dark years, and at this point I had already began cussing God. I knew He was real, but I hated Him too, and I let Him know that, and so it was very... What
was that about? You feel like He was targeting you, or what was...
Well, yeah, I just, without an understanding of who He was, right, I had no understanding of Christ's love or God's love, and I'm not knocking the Catholic Church, but, I just didn't, I didn't learn about Jesus, it was just, if you mess up, come and say these Hail Marys and do these few things and move on with your life. But I would, they would go religiously to church on Sundays, and we went, and I stopped at the age of 14 because we would go to this place and they would talk about this God, and I would watch these people in their suits and ties, and and then I'd watch them leave, and especially my own family, and go back to the home life that I had, and I said, if this is who God is, I don't want nothing to do with them. It's not somebody that I want to be around. And so it really kickstarted a search for me because I, from a very early age, had a strong desire for spiritual answers, In high school, I played Dungeons and Dragons and live action vampire and some of these really demonic things.
Right.
But I was looking for answers, and the world that I lived in, I can remember the only prayer I ever prayed was God, if you're real, let me find an alternate universe. Let me just be anywhere but here. This planet, because this isn't it,
Were you suicidal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and a lot of that's, you can still see scars on my arms from a teenager.
You mentioned hallucinogens a lot.
Yep.
And I've that's like a running theme. It's when that is one drug that people use often, it's because they're looking for answers in this higher understanding. Something's got to make sense. So this is going to get me there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my understanding of the world, I'd gotten to a place where if this is it, I don't want to be here. And I either need to find somewhere else or we're just not going to be here anymore, and so this went on throughout high school, and there's 1,000 million stories and all of that. And thankfully I had, really awesome probation officer, Miss Tracy, and she just loved me to death for some reason. And, and I had that with my teachers too, most of them, that they saw a good kid in me, and they saw potential, and they would try to speak that. I have some really prominent figures throughout childhood that would step up and speak positivity into my life. But just as an example, in 8th grade, I had a teacher, and as my English teacher, and she loved me to death. And I would write poetry. I was always a writer as a kid. It was one of my outlets, and I wrote this poem, and she secretly sent it off, and it won this national contest. And she was so proud and excited to introduce that to the class. And I remember, and this was really right before everything blew up, and I remember her reading that to the class, and the only thing that swelled up in me was so much self-hatred for my life, and I completely denied. I got so mad at her for doing that, that anything would go in that direction. And I completely, when I look back at that moment, it would be a moment that would propel most kids to success and a path of something worthwhile. And it did the opposite to me, because I'd just been fed so much garbage in my life that it couldn't possibly...
You couldn't latch on to anything good.
Couldn't latch on to it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine, too, like if somebody is an aspiring writer or wants to do that for the creativity of it, that can feel like a good thing to get praise. But for somebody like you who that is really a vulnerable emotional outlet, it probably felt like somebody was, putting you naked in front of the class. I mean, is that...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of experiences like that when I was in military school. They... promised my mom that they would fix me, and they were going to get the right discipline and put me straight, and I think I made it there 4 months before they kicked me out of there. But similar experience there, where one of the lieutenants, because it's a college too, and so they have college kids, much like West Point, where they go and they'll be officers once they complete college and do boot camp, that they go into the military as officers. But they also had a high school, and so you had the college kids that were kind of over the high school kids. And there was one guy that was taking psychology classes and really kind of latched on to me, and I struggled, there from the very beginning. And anyways, he had me share my testimony with him, and I opened up with him and did that, and it was part of one of his classes. And I remember about a week later, I was walking through, and there was a couple of officers that really just couldn't stand me, because I was a bad kid. I gave everybody trouble, and he pulled me aside, and he said, "Ryan, hey, I'm just sorry. We've been so hard on you. We didn't know about your past, and it was supposed to be an anonymous thing, and it was. They just figured out who he was talking about, and from that point, I went from just kind of being in trouble to lighting a room on fire and walking around and saluting people with my middle finger and telling everybody what for, And
it was every time you received anything good, any praise, that compassion right there. Nope.
It made me explode. I would self implode, so
you didn't see the acceptance that he was offering. You saw the betrayal of the
correct. And so it wasn't long after that. I remember the commandant, and he was a sergeant. He begged and pleaded, and these memories came back when I was just up there. And awesome man. I wish I could meet him again. I don't even know if he's still alive. It's been 30 years, but I remember he called me into his office to plead with me, and I just got done cutting my arms, and I mean, pretty bad. And went in his office just bleeding on his carpet, and I just remember the look of horror on this guy's face, and he just had no idea what to say, he just pleaded with me to change my life, and that my mom had to come pick me up that day, get me off campus, but they ended up giving her money back.
Yeah. Well, they didn't fix you.
They did not fix me, and but I remember that man just pleading with me and trying to tell me that there was a better life. It's one of those moments that stuck out later down the road, and. So these kind of things just continued to happen throughout high school, and I kept going in and out of treatment. And
now, did you finish high school, or
no?
You came out and you started to go into these types of places.
Yeah. So what would have been my senior year, I'd gotten in some pretty serious trouble and some check fraud and some different things of that nature, and I had a choice. I could either go to Mount Meigs till I was 21, or I could go to this. Year-long treatments that my grandmother had found for me, and so she was the patriarch of our family. She was probably when we would go to Atlanta for Thanksgiving and summers and do family stuff with my mom's side of the family. I didn't do much with my dad's because they lived in South Dakota, but she was always the one that was the Christian in my family, and she would go and feed the homeless and at Thanksgiving and do those kinds of, and I would always tag along with her. We were pen pals and had a very strong relationship with my grandmother, and even though I dress in all black, mohawks and all the crazy things that I did, I never cussed in front of my grandmother. There was something about her presence that would calm me down. And so they found this rehab to send me to, and it was actually based on the Native American medicine wheel and that culture of Native Americans. And so when I went there, I really latched onto it for a lot of different reasons. One, it wasn't Christianity. And two, it was something mystical, which was
right up your alley.
Correct, and it's what I wanted. I knew there was a spiritual, mystical world out there, and I wanted to grab a hold of it, and I laugh at it now because it was always there.
Yeah.
In Christ, but I just had nobody to tell me or show me or lead the way so that I could understand that.
I think part of it is you wanted to find any other answer but that.
Yeah, I did.
Anything but that.
Yeah, well, my dad represented that, and the church that I went to represented that, and none of that helped me, and nobody tried to help me in that context.
Right.
And the only real Christianity I think I experienced at an early age was at boot camp, and they would take us to this black church in Thomasville, and I remember the first time I went there, and it had to have been Pentecostal. I don't know. I didn't know anything about that world. I thought those kind of Christians were snake handlers and crazy. But we went to this church every Sunday, and I was there for about 6 weeks. And I just remember, I don't remember anything else about it except the good food that we ate every Sunday and the praise music, and I just remember dancing every Sunday and just being
that resonated
engulfed.
with you.
Yeah, it resonated, and so that was kind of my encounter with the only church, that was spirit-filled that I know of, that tried to grab a hold of me, but I was just too lost at that time of my life. And so,
was there a temporary change that occurred?
No.
Just momentary.
I did good in most of the programs with the structure. I would find myself doing the military school was a different thing, but for the most part, I did well when I got sent off. And would kind of toe the line and would make friends and do those kinds of things. But, as soon as I got back out.
There was nothing lasting.
Yeah. No, it almost immediately coming out, The last one was really the only one, it was a year-long deal, and it was based on you do good things happen. You do bad things happen. And so it was up in the mountains in Tennessee. We lived in log cabins, no electricity in the cabins. It was all fire heated, and everything was about 2 miles apart, and you walked everywhere, and it was right on the Tennessee River. A very beautiful place, and had a lot of change there, and it really saved my life because the trajectory that I was on previous, there's no way I was not going to prison for the rest of my life, or I was going to be dead, and so this place changed me enough that I began to find forgiveness and find some peace and clean out some of the things in my life, and so a lot of that, and I'm very, very grateful for that culture, and what it did for me, and God really used it to begin.
Yeah. Is this the one that was based on the Native American?
Correct. Yeah, and God really used that to reach my heart, at that time, and try to help me see that there was love in the world, and there was peace in the world, and I could be something different, and aspire to do something good with my life, and so there was a drastic change that happened at that time that previously it was all self-destructive.
Yeah.
And I wanted to die and I didn't care and it just didn't matter, but once I came through this program, there was enough in me, and a large part of it was that we had family counseling. It wasn't just counseling with me, like my parents were forced to have weekly counseling. And so I remember the first session when they came in, the counselor, they went to talking about me, and she said, "No, I want to know about y'all," and that started a process of me being able to hear their lives and hear them talk and hear them express their hearts, and it was very volatile and heard a lot of things, but what it enabled me to do was humanize my dad and humanize my mom and see them in a different light. And through that process, through the year, I was able to just let it go, and forgive.
Well,
that
you started. I was saying you started to feel the same compassion that the man that came to you after he heard your story,
correct,
and was like, "Okay, I can see this different. You're not just a jerk kid. You're hurt.
Yeah."
You're broken.
But did you start to see, because along those lines, did you start to see when you say you saw them in a different light, I often talk about how forgiveness is a shift in perspective from seeing somebody as innately intentional about their meanness or bad behavior to seeing them as broken.
Yeah.
And is this the beginning of you beginning to see your parents as also broken individuals with
absolutely. And I don't think until that point, I had some really great counselors that were there that really walked me through a lot of stuff and struggles and that I began to allow because they stayed with us in the cabin. It was a very close knit thing. And so my heart really began to lean towards some of these figures that were being father figures in my life, where I'd never had that before in that capacity, and so I began to watch them and what they did, and I think that really kind of started my quest for types of social work and having that heart to help people and counsel and do those kinds of things.
How old are you at this time?
40 at this time?
During this
17.
Program? 17. Okay.
Yeah, 17 years old, and there's a lot in there, obviously, to unpack. But what I do know is that through that time, I was able to see my parents in a different light. I was able to let it go, lay it down. Now, it didn't keep me sober. I think when I graduated and left, started a new era of my life, and, but I was personally, and I feel bad for my brothers because I feel like the lucky one, because I got to see a side of my parents and experience something that they never got to, they never got closure, they never got to talk about these things or get that understanding, and I feel very blessed in that I was able to work through those particular issues at that time, and so. When I turned, I was court ordered there, and when I turned 18, they let me on my first home pass. I think I'd been there 11 and a half months at that point, and they wanted me to stay another 3 or 4 months to complete program, but I went home, and one of my biggest downfalls were my friends, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I went home and saw my friends, and immediately, that longing of, they're filling me in of their senior year and everything that happened and
what you missed.
Yeah, everything that I missed, and I was set up to go to school, in Tennessee there, and I wanted to be a photojournalist for National Geographic, and had me set up at a halfway house and school, and was accepted to go to school, and I went home and almost immediately, and this was a trend that I went through for years of opportunities that I passed up because I wanted to be with my group of friends, and I went back. And that night I told them, I said, I want to sign myself out. And they said, well, you're court ordered. And I said, well, I'm 18. So that's over with. And that was actually the first time I ever hitchhiked. I signed myself out and left the next day and hitchhiked home.
From Tennessee?
Yeah, from Tennessee. And came home. Of course, my parents are furious, and I ended up moving in with a friend and with about 3 other guys. And I think 4 of us paid rent and about 30 people lived there.
Yeah.
In the time frame that I was there. And of course, in short order.
Boy, what a polar opposite of environments, right? From this therapeutic home to jumping right back into the mix.
Didn't miss a beat, and I think I stayed sober for about 2 months. I gave it a valiant try, but at this point everyone's 18, and the rave scene was very big at that time in the late 90s, and now I found myself engrossed in a culture that I thought was love and peace and joy, and
bringing more of your hallucinogenics.
Correct. Yeah, same path. Different reason and rhyme to it all, and it was no longer dark, and so I convinced myself that this was a good path. Because it was full of what I assumed to be love and good things.
Before we go any further, let's take a minute to address the man or the woman listening to today's episode and wishing for a better life. Or maybe addiction has completely overtaken a family member or a friend.
You are not alone. As you may know, the Jesus Loves Addicts podcast is produced by the Home of Grace, a Christ-centered addiction recovery program in South Mississippi with over 60 years of experience.
The Home of Grace has residential programs ranging from 30 days to 12 months. With 2 separate campuses for men and women, they are fully staffed with caring individuals who want nothing more than to guide you to a life of recovery.
Services include individual and group counseling, marriage and family counseling, classes, workshops, GED, and workforce training, all grounded in biblical principles.
And because of donations from the community, the cost of the program is incredibly affordable.
Thousands of alumni from across the country can tell you there is no other program in the world quite like the Home of Grace.
If you want to start a new path to recovery, don't wait. Speak with an admission specialist today. Visit homeofgrace.org or call 833-55-GRACE to talk with someone.
That's 833-55-GRACE. Call the Home of Grace today.
Once again, much like the alcohol, I fell in love with music, and I fell in love with dancing, and fell in love with this culture that I'd never experienced before, and I was off and running again.
This is the rave culture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The techno music, club
hippie
dancing.
culture, rave culture, and but this began my what I call my spiritual journey to really seeking God, because now, my view of God had changed from this vengeful, hateful God to one that opened this door in a desert place of love rushing in, and all of a sudden I felt like I had purpose and passion. And my dad called me Johnny Applespeak because in the rave culture there was an acronym called PLUR. And it stood for peace, love, unity, and respect. And I remember the first time I heard it, it just changed my mindset. And so God was doing something in that time that I misused and didn't see properly. But in my heart and my mind, I knew that this could change the world. And this became my process of wanting to change the world. And so I used to write these flyers on PLUR and what I thought it meant and what it meant to the rave culture and how it could change people.
It's going to fix everybody.
I'm going to fix it all. So I used to go to these festivals and pass out thousands of these flyers and talk to people and begin putting on festivals.
You were proselytizing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was very prophetic. You know, and when I look back, God was doing some things in me and teaching me and preparing me for when I did come to Him, and He was trying to do things in me then that I couldn't see, but I had no teacher, right? And the Bible says, how can they learn, right? How can they go unless a teacher's sent, right? Unless there's one to send there. And I had some teachers, but they weren't good teachers,
the wrong kind,
you know. And so I was still seeking that, and found it in some very bad characters that did a number on my mental status, and that's a whole another story. It would take a while to get into that, but I had met an individual not long after getting out and moving in that house. Me and a friend, we had gotten word that we were going to get busted any day, and the cops were warning parents to tell their kids not to come to our house, and so we got wise about it, and we packed our stuff up, and we left with a little Python and a Crown Royal bag and $16 and started hitchhiking, and so we left, and that started a 3-year process of traveling and hitchhiking for me, and I went all over the country, just traveling and going to these festivals and just moving around the country, and but in that process, it was really amazing. I learned what faith was, and I learned, what joy was through nature and different things that I experienced. Because a lot of times out on the highway when I was walking, I had nothing but time, and I talked to God all the time. You know, and granted, I believed in Jesus. You know, He was a man, and He came, and He was a teacher and those kinds of things. But there's many pathways to heaven and all of those things. And Jesus is who I wanted Him to be. You know, He was the cool guy that was okay with me smoking pot and taking acid. And He didn't mind. He wasn't like the religious folks in the church, you know what I mean?
He'd be fine with it.
Yeah, you know, and so I began praying and talking to God constantly, but I was so perverted in my mind and my spirit, that it was still the same story, and I would do good for a while, and then something would happen. I'd go to jail and some altercation with the police or an individual, and that story lasted, until I got saved, and very lawless, very much in my mind, I thought myself to be this revolutionary and against the law, and wasn't going to do anything that they said, and anti-government, and
you were sharing the throne with God.
Yes, exactly. And so of course that got me in a lot of trouble, and I want to share a few points on a few things that happened, so I don't get too lost on rabbit trails. But so there was that one individual that I met traveling. His name was Florida, and hippies love to give themselves state names and nature names and all these different things. And I ended up meeting him in Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, and I was traveling back from San Francisco, and I had met him downtown, and some friends of mine ended up, we all kind of merged in this place from different places that we were at, and we bought this camper from this guy, and he ended up coming with us, and so we traveled around in this camper down the bottom of Texas or along the border, and we're heading back to Alabama, and took about 3 months, and we would go a little ways and stop and panhandle for gas, and I would make hemp jewelry to sell necklaces, and so anyways, this guy assumed himself to be some type of prophet, and he was in his Bible and talking about Jesus and God, and but the things that he talked a lot about spiritual warfare and demonic things and all of these things, and he taught me a lot, but he never shared the saving grace of Christ with me. And so I was introduced to a lot of things about spiritual warfare and a lot of things about demonic presences and all these things that that he focused on, that he put in my spirit, but yet I had no protection over my life because I didn't know Jesus. You know, I didn't have a relationship with him, and so from that point forward, I began a downward spiral. That when I would take hallucinogens or I would smoke marijuana, I began to have extreme demonic experiences.
You only thought you were in torment before.
Yeah, I only thought so. It was emotional torment. Now I was in some very serious spiritual torment, and I know today that this was Satan's quest to have me kill myself. And he was trying to take me out and doing everything that he could to do that.
So was that desire reemerging in your life, this desire to kill yourself, or has it been present the whole time?
No, it went away.
Okay.
There was that didn't come back till years later, and I'll share that in just a minute.
Okay.
But I never thought about killing myself again, but the thoughts, the intrusive thoughts of it, came back from time to time, but they weren't my thoughts. I never meditated on killing myself again. It was always a very intrusive thing that would barrage me, That
you would intentionally reject at that point.
As best as I could. And so I was with this gentleman for a while. We came back to Alabama. We set up a camp in the woods. When I was traveling, and whenever I came home, I wouldn't really go home. I'd just set up a tent in the woods and hang out for a little bit, and I'd be gone again, and did that for a number of years. But I was home visiting. It was Christmas, and a friend of mine gave me some drugs, and I went over to a friend's house, and it was cold, very cold out, and it was supposed to be ecstasy. I don't know what it was, but it was. I'm sure it was a mixture of all kinds of things. And this friend that I had read my tarot cards that night, and I could feel a different presence. That evening, and she read my tarot cards, and I just had this eerie feeling on me, and I remember when we left, I was almost like a zombie, I was in this trance almost, and I remember walking out of the house, and it was so cold that my body just began to convulse, and it lasted for like 10 minutes, and so somewhere in that, with the drugs, I believed in my mind that I had died, 1,000%. And so I thought I had died, and my mind convinced me, and whatever demonic forces were messing convinced me that I was no longer in my body, that I was in a spirit world. And so I had a camp across the woods in Daphne, and we were on Sage Avenue in Mobile, and some things happened, and we went to this house with a bunch of drunk people, and and things were crazy and violent, and all of a sudden I heard these voices. And this is a funny story now. If I could get up and show it to you, it'd be even funnier. But in my mind, I had these voices tell me that I had to meet Jesus in the woods at my camp so he could take me back to my body, or I'd be stuck there forever. And so I had all these concepts of hell, and from this guy that I had met, and he pumped me full of all these demons this and demons that, and opened up all these spiritual doors. He really did. He opened up another world to me that I didn't even really know or believe existed, but I did then. Through this time with him, and. But these voices told me I needed to run from this place, and so I started running from Government Street 65 exit towards the tunnel, running down the interstate. And here's the funny part. Y'all don't laugh at me too much on TV land, but the voices told me that, the only way I was going to make it, they couldn't see me if I was naked, and so. Oh, my gosh. Oh, yeah. You ever read that verse? You ever read that verse, the Seven Sons of Sceva? No. Right? When they came and they were trying to cast out these devils, and they said, all I know, Jesus I know, well, who are you? Right?
Yeah.
And they whooped him 7 days of Sunday, and he left naked. Right? That was me. And
running down the interstate.
Running down the
I'm
side of the
thinking we
interstate.
both know exactly where that is. So I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. I'm sorry to put that mental image anywhere, but so I'm running down the interstate naked, and I made it almost to the bridge. I don't know how far, but by the time I got there, I was running so slow. And I'd get up and narrate it, but I mean, tortoise speed. I'd been throwing up, and so I'm going, and there's a cop sitting up there. He's got his lights on, and he's standing at the front of his car.
He's just waiting.
But I didn't even look at him because I was invincible, right? And so I'm just kind of going by him, and he was so shocked, like he could have just reached out and grabbed me, but like I'm running that close to him, and
that slow.
I got my head held high, and I'm just running right by him.
He can't see you.
Yeah, he can't see me, and so I probably got about 5 feet past him before he finally came and grabbed me.
I don't know who was more surprised, you or him.
Yeah, so the trick was I forgot to take my bandana off. So so
sure.
he could still see me. He could still see me.
That's great.
Yeah, it really is. That's a funny story now, but
it wasn't then.
Yeah, it was then too. It just wasn't funny to me then. So he took me to jail that night. But the thing that happened in this experience, when it was, I think I was in jail for 20 hours, and I probably looked like a caged animal. I think there was about 15 people in the drunk tank, and they made I was so gone in a different reality when I got there, and they pulled me in and took me out. They were trying to give me clothes to put on, and I didn't even know what they were. They're yelling and screaming at me. They had to dress me. I was just
out of
it. Couldn't understand their speech. None of it. I was gone, and so I thought I was in some purgatory. Purgatory prison.
It was
I
like
didn't
drug-induced psychosis.
Very much so. And so when I got bonded out that next day, some friends came and got me. I had to have a friend, go down in his boxers in the parking lot so I'd have some clothes to even get out of jail, And but from that moment forward, that was 2000. Oh man, 2001, 2002, somewhere in that area. I suffered from a different kind of torment that lasted until I got saved. But sober, drunk, high, it didn't matter. I would go into these states of psychosis that I thought I was dead. That any moment the veil was gonna be pulled, and I was going to be in hell, and so it actually caused me to drink a lot more. I would to sleep sometimes, but just have to drink myself stupid just to go to bed, and I couldn't stand being sober because these feelings, these thoughts would just
never
come
leave.
in, and I would try to fight them. I would try to live normally. I would try to do these things, but they would always come back, and of course they would always be intensified every time I took drugs. And that funny story, there's 100 more where I would just completely trip out and run off into the woods. And it's amazing I never died in some of those experiences. A couple out in the national forest that I just disappeared off in the woods, just completely freaked out. So this went on for a very long time, and I would try to quit. I think when I was 23, I went to AA the first time, and I stayed sober for about 2.5 years. And I was a young kid, did speaker meetings and hosted meetings, and did very well. But in the back of my mind, I still struggled with all these issues. At this time, I'd had my son, and was dealing with issues with his mom, and they lived in Ohio, and that was a struggle. And I was trying to do right, and I wanted to do right. And when I look back, there was always that thing in my heart, that I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to be that way. But I didn't think I had a choice,
Still living according to the labels that were burnt into your conscience.
Correct. Yeah. Like that's who I am, and that's who I'm always going to be for eternity, And I could never break that, I started my first business at 22, and it got to a point where looked like it was going to do good, and I destroyed it, in the Rave days. I had 9 different production groups that were going to come together and put on free festivals, and people that began listening to what I was saying, and I completely destroyed it, So anytime anything, as much as I would try, I would get to this place that it would become a viable, a good thing, right? And as soon as I realized that, I would destroy it. Something would happen and would tear it down, and this cycle just kept going throughout life.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the fear of failure is often it's a twin of the fear of success, right? Because those who fear failure see success as a setup for failure, right? And so you don't let yourself ever kind of cross the finish line. Let me ask you to do something, if you would. Okay. We're going to have to kind of wrap up here, and I don't want to squeeze the end of your story into the few minutes that we have left. What I'd like you to, typically we'll do an intro and an outro to these 2-parters. What we're going to have to do is bring you back. I would love to bring you back and finish this, because it's such a powerful story. Thus far in your journey, how would you, knowing what you know now, looking in that rearview mirror, how would you sum up this part of your journey from a Christian standpoint as you're looking back now?
Yep. What I know to be true, is that I'm a whosoever, and that God spent an eternity trying to reach my heart and my life, and that He used many different angles and ways, and very much a lot of them, people would say God wouldn't use, but I'll disagree with them, that He used different cultures and people and things and experiences to try to reach me. And even in the darkest of times, and even as bad as it got, God was there, and there was a piece of me that always knew that. There was a piece of me that yearned for that and wanted that. And so to sum up, to that point, the only leadership that I had was really bad leadership outside of some of the institutions that I went to. And I was yearning for fathership. Sure. I was yearning for mentorship. I was yearning to get answers and to find a way, but there was nobody to show me, and so when I look back now on that time of my life, it's one of the main reasons that I do discipleship, and I've dedicated my life to doing Christian discipleship, is because I had none.
You had none.
When I look back, that's why I dedicate myself to evangelism, and street evangelism, and drive-through evangelism, and I don't go anywhere without tracts. I don't go anywhere without being ready to share my testimony. Because when I look back at my life, I ask myself, where were we? I can say we now because I'm that person, but where were the people that needed to be in my life to share Jesus with me? Where were the individuals that could share their testimony and care enough to take me under their wing. And I know they were there, and for whatever reason.
Also care enough to push through when you pushed them away.
Correct. Correct.
Because we run into a lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's why I love the church that I go to, Love Me Anyway.
Yeah.
Ministries, because we don't care, we don't care how much you mess up. We don't care if you come in drunk. We don't care if you come in high.
We're still going to love you.
We're going to love you, right where you're at, and until you get something enough to start loving yourself. And that's really, when I look back, that's what I needed, right? I just needed somebody to love me enough to not let me push them away, to not let me run them off, and to care enough to see me succeed.
Well, it's interesting. I think, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I will just simply say one of the things I hear in your story is God kind of fanning the flames of your search.
Yeah.
Right? So you just said that I think a lot of Christians may look back and see some of these characters that were put in your life and think, well, God wouldn't use that. Well, that's silly. We live in a fallen world, and so what he has to use are broken pieces, and he does it amazingly well, right? And so thank God he does.
Beautifully broken.
Right? So, so, and I'm assuming that even one of the things you're referring to there would be the Native American program that you were in, because as you were talking about it, I was thinking, boy, what an amazing thing. Here's somebody who was kind of rejecting the truth of Christ, but yet God brought you to a place where spirituality became a possibility to you again, right? A stepping stone closer, right? So not just kind of throwing what you've already rejected back into your face, but let's get him to see the possibility of spirituality again, right? It's just, and I can relate to that very briefly in my, college years. I took a parapsychology course, and that's essentially the New Age movement wrapped up for the West here. And so they just teach it. And before I was a Christian, I was encouraged by my professor to kind of experience things and seek out things. And so, that's what I was seeking, the New Age bookstores, spiritualist, all that stuff. But God did use that. And at the very same time, there were people who parachuted in that were already Christians, right? And so I get that, man. And so I love that part of your journey. And I really do. I really just see him kind of fanning the flames and kind of getting you back there, right? He's closing certain doors open. I mean, you can see him steering you back. And I, for one, will be chomping at the bit to hear the rest of the story. So when we end here, we're going to look at our calendar and find out our next available date and see if that fits for you guys, for you. And, I just want to say for those of you guys listening, these stories are so fascinating. Of course, the mic drop is that piece where we find ourselves on solid ground again, where we come to Christ. But the journey is so important, right? I mean, the Bible says, seek and ye shall find. And of course, you need to keep seeking. And as long as you're truly seeking, he will steer. And it may be a windy road that we take, but he knows best. And I just want to say that, if you're out there and you feel unsure, like you're on unsteady ground, you may be. But if you're seeking, you're in very steady hands. And so keep looking, keep striving, keep doing the next right thing, keep taking the next step, keep looking. One other quick thing is that I do want to just plant the idea that truth, I know that there's a very pervasive thought out there now that truth is relative. But guys, that doesn't even make logical sense, right? If my truth is different than Kathryn's truth is different than Ryan's truth, you can believe that. We can grasp, we can talk about that. But it doesn't make logical sense. What makes logical sense is that if there is a truth, right? That word, truth, if there is a truth, what makes logical sense is that it would be singular, right? That's what makes logical sense. If there is a truth, that truth must be singular, because if it's relative, well, then we have competing truths, and that's not truth at all. What that is opinions, and certainly we're all entitled to those, but it's not truth. So I throw that out there. Hopefully that makes sense in the grand scheme of things. It's where you got my mind going, Ryan, so I appreciate you being here. I can't wait to have you back. Guys, again, Jesus Loves Addicts. Find us on your favorite podcast carrying venue and join us. And we love you. God loves you. Keep striving. We'll see you next time.